Hi, welcome to Unapologetically You with myself, Tuls and Kelly. So today we're going to start this brand new three-part episode, and we are specifically focusing on the topic of self-sabotage. So this will be broken down into, signs for self-sabotage, the ways we are self-sabotaging ourselves, and a bit of Kelly and I's experiencing on that topic. So yeah, if you're not already subscribed, if you're watching this on YouTube, please subscribe and hit that notification bell. And if you're watching this or hearing this on Spotify, if you resonate with it, please let us know. And also share this with family and friends if you do. Hi, Cal.
Yes. Good. Hey, Tuls, how are you?
Yeah, good, thanks. So today's self-sabotage. Well, for the next few episodes, right?
Episodes, yeah.
And the first one, this is a little bit, I think I'm always going to resonate with all of the self-sabotage topics that we talk about. But this one is breaking promises to ourselves or others. Now, when I had a quick check on Google, a trusty Google, it's apparently about not only letting ourselves down, it's letting others down too. So we are not following through on promises, or we're breaking them easier than dealing with challenges at the moment. So for me, It struck me saying, okay, so how do I break promises to myself or others? So I thought about others first, right? So let's just think about, we cancel on a friend, or I've canceled on a friend, and it's because you just don't want to go. Like, it's not on the friend, it's just you're not in that space to feel energetic, feel lively. And so, for example, I don't have enough energy within myself. Instead of saying, I'm not okay, I'm struggling, or I need space to myself to figure it out, and some people do this, make meaningless excuses. Yes. So, what is that? Why do we do that?
No, but we all have, haven't we? Well, it is exhaustion, right? So that's when you are on that brink of exhaustion, whether you're, and we've talked in previous episodes about being a mum and being very tired and studying really hard and being really tired and chasing that career and being really tired. But they're not mutually exclusive. That's not the only three reasons in the whole wide world why you're exhausted. There are so many other reasons why we're tired. And I think sometimes making up excuses, like you say, is easier than facing the real truth. Yeah. And it does all come down to being exhausted. You're just tired. Yeah. So why do we take the effort when we're so tired? Why do we make the effort to make something up rather than address the real problem or the real issue? Do you think we're unaware of it? I think sometimes you're unaware of it. I think I was unaware or didn't know it was a thing. I didn't know it was allowed that you could be too tired. Okay, so I think sometimes you don't even know that you're allowed to be tired, and you don't give yourself permission to be tired, and you don't even know that you can use it as a valid excuse not to be able to do things, go out places, be available for people emotionally, physically.
Yeah, I really like the fact that you touched upon the exhaustion fact, especially for our last couple of episodes when we talked about that. Sometimes we're just not aware. Like, we know we're tired, but you just carry on, right? Smile, Absolutely. Carry on, that's it. Yep. But when it comes to those breaking promises, it's almost like, well, why do we feel the need to make that?
Because it takes more energy to sync up the lie, right? I don't know why.
Maybe it's because, again, like you said, we're not aware of it. We're exhausted. We think that we are protecting their feelings by lying. But me and my brother had this conversation the other week, and we said, so something happened in our family, and one of my family members wanted to make an excuse to leave our relatives' home. So rather than saying, we've got a lot of stuff going on, we're gonna go, there was almost like this conspiracy of, just say you've got this and then we'll go.
Yeah.
Wait a second. It's our family. Like, do you really feel like a lie is appropriate right now? Like, I'm just like, this person who suggested it is over 60 years old. And you just think to yourself, well, wait a second. Why do you want to lie to those you love just because, like, well, you don't want to be there. You want to obviously get on with your day. That's okay. Like,
yes, exactly. Yeah.
Isn't
it is
our
okay.
life more harmful? Like, why would you lie to your loved one?
I know. And looking back, I think I've been fed a lot of, well, not a lot maybe, but I've been fed a few of those excuses over the years, and definitely have used some myself. Instead of being real about it. But I think people do appreciate it when you are real about it.
Yeah.
I do remember one time it was obvious that a couple, friends of ours, were having a fight, like a real banger of an argument. They turned up having had the argument, okay, and they did not get together the whole night. So it makes it uncomfortable for everyone, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But they owned it. They halfway through, they just went like, "We're gonna go. Like we're just not having fun." We turned up, had a fight in the car, turned up, haven't spoken to each other. They said, "We don't know if you've noticed." And oh, we've noticed. But they were real about it. They didn't say they had to go and pick a child up or had something else to do, or they owned it. And you know what, we laughed about it at the time, but we laugh even more about it now because they were real and honest about it, and they're still together. So when you see them, go, "Oh, remember that time?" They go, "Oh my gosh, that was like the worst fight we ever had." But it's funny to look back on that now. But if they'd told this conspiracy theory about just say this or let's just say that, number one, it was obvious to everyone why they were leaving.
Yeah.
And number two, where's the humour in it 10 years down the track? So now we have that story to tell forever, or because the truth was told that time. I loved it.
Yeah, and that's such a good story to look back on. And we're laughing about these situations now, but actually just thinking to yourself, well, if we are more honest with one another, it doesn't overcomplicate things. And also, if we feel like we are visiting somebody or we are in somebody else's presence, maybe it'll be a friend, a work colleague, a family member, why do we need that to highlight that Instagram reel? We are highlighting a fraction of our lives when we are interacting with this person, right? And we are divulging information. We may be vulnerable. We may be able to say, well, this is our highlight reel. This is how I've been in my life, or this is the circumstances that I've been going through. But we're not really raw with them. We're not truthful enough with them because we feel like, well, actually, I don't know, maybe there's a fear there. Maybe there's there's the self-sabotage of not admitting the inadequacy. We're lacking that honesty with ourselves, or maybe we're lacking the trust in others with that honesty.
Probably both of those things to a degree, but what else could there be as well? Because I don't think it's just one thing, and I don't think it's just two things. I think there's so many different factors that feed into, why you self-sabotage like that.
Maybe that we were given broken promises. So it's that self-fulfilling prophecy of we're told this. Because it has to come from somewhere. If somebody says, "Oh, I'm not going to come today because of that," or they have the joke of, "I'm washing my hair, I'm doing this."
Right.
And so people know the tagline and they'll keep using the tagline. I'm sure they'll say that specifically less now. But we know if you end up making excuses, that you end up not getting asked anymore, right?
Oh, yeah.
But it's also, it's that breaking promises to ourselves. It's almost like we're not able to see through the fog of why we're breaking promises to ourselves. So say, for example, what's a promise that we would break to ourselves? Oh, a simple one. I'm going to exercise, or I'm going to diet, or whatever it is, right? For myself. It's not a case of, they may want to look good and feel good, but for their health and also their overall well-being to themselves and their family, Why do you self-sabotage going, oh, you know what, I'm just going to have ice cream, or I'm going to have pizza, and then it starts to go, oh, let's just have more and more and more. Oh, I've broken that promise to myself to give myself a better way of living.
Yeah, I think, why do we break promises? I think the consequence is not consequential enough for you to stick to it. Okay, so a friend of mine developed I don't know if he developed it himself or not, but this is what he used to do. He'd say, if I don't follow through on what I'm going to do, what would be something that would really make me sad? And one thing, he did it to his wife. He said to her, if you don't, what do you want to do? Because she was always wanting to do stuff and not following through with it. What is this one thing that you're going to do? And she named it. And he said, if you don't do that, you've got to give your favorite necklace to your cousin that you don't like. And so she did it. You know, that consequence to her was enough she didn't want the pain of doing it, but she definitely did not want the pain of giving the necklace to the cousin that she had or she did not like. So so she did the less painful thing. It wasn't she did want to do it, but it was still a pain to do it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So it was, if there's a painful thing that you need to do, you need to make the consequence of not doing it more painful.
Yeah, for sure. And you need to stick to that. Like, it's all well and good saying, okay, well, this is the consequence of my actions if I break the promise to myself. But if you then like completely ignore that and just go, I don't want to do that now, you're breaking another promise and a commitment.
Another promise to yourself and to everyone who what you're going to do helped, right? So yeah, you are breaking promises to yourself. So I think the consequences sometimes aren't severe enough or don't matter enough. So sometimes even if you are hurting someone else by not doing it, that consequence isn't enough for you to want to change and start exercising or start eating better nutrition so the consequence has to be enough for you to want to do it.
It's almost like that, the willpower, the resilience, the motivation, all of these things are so fleeting that we have to rely on habits. But in order for those habits to solidify and maintain, we forget that step-by-step approach. We are thinking instantaneously like, oh, I want this or I want this result, right? And we're not looking more long-term. We're not looking at it as an investment. We're looking at it as like a cash machine. Well, if I just pin my number in, I'm going to get the cash now. Whereas actually look at it as an investment of, right, what am I doing in the long term for this? If I continue to break promises to myself and others, what are the consequences of that? And also, why am I doing it? Like, where did it come from? Because I think that we don't ask ourselves those big questions enough to actually go, why am I breaking this promise to my friend or my colleague? Because we would never break, we would never say to our boss, right, well, I'm not doing this deadline, or you hand it in late, or you just completely neglect your work duties, right? We have this level of commitment because there's a contract in place, but we're not able to do that when it comes to self-care or maintaining relationship quality and commitment and loyalty, because it's not tangible, is it? It's not on a contract. There's no, like you said earlier, there's no substantial consequence to breaking those things.
No, that's right. And the consequences are really individual as well, right? So let's go back to the necklace one. Me giving my necklace to, I don't even have a least favorite cousin, and I know you don't either, really, because you've got a lovely, loving, big family.
Yeah,
but
I can think of one or two.
Okay. So you have to give your necklace to your least favorite family member, I guess, but it has to be your favorite necklace and least favorite person. But I guess those two, you have to give something you really love to someone you don't really respect maybe it doesn't even have to be a family member or something, but that might hurt you, hit you, hurt you. I don't know. I don't want to hurt you. But sometimes giving money away is. Actually, I did hear about this one time. It was called a lockbox or a vault. Anyway, you pledged an amount of money. So say I am going to do a podcast a week for 52 weeks, and I'm going to put $20,000 in this vault. And if I don't do that, I lose the money. But if I prove that I've done this, then the money comes back to me.
Yeah.
Okay? And so I don't know if it was a real thing or something that we thought would be a good thing. I can't remember. This is Terry talking about Terry. This is also Terry's wife had to give the necklace away. I think maybe we thought it was a good thing, but it is the idea of not just saying, if I don't do it, then I have to give $20,000, because if you don't do it, then you're not going to give $20,000. I mean, that's
it has to be realistic. It has to be meaningful. And for those people who don't value material things, giving away a necklace isn't going to be meaningful to them. So it's almost like, what are the consequences to you? So say, for example, if you value your family and you say, right, if I don't do this, well, then I'm not going to contact the loved ones. Something in terms of like, this is ridiculous. Like, no amount of time or money will equate to me breaking that promise. So keeping it up to the value of what you're actually trying to do.
Your own values, which takes us back again to the podcast we just did about having those, or knowing your values, not just having them, but knowing the four I think we chose that were meaningful to you. So having to break one of those values would be a significant consequence, wouldn't it?
Yeah, for sure. Like, what are your values, and what does it mean if somebody else breaks it or you break it, right?
It's a deal breaker sometimes. If someone else breaks it, it's a deal breaker, right? But if you break
the thing, if somebody else breaks a promise to you, so how is this easy? If we end up saying to a friend, oh, if a friend does this to me, I'm going to disown them. Or if a family member does this to me, they're gone.
Yeah.
What makes us put that boundary in place? And I know we're going to talk about boundaries a little bit later in this podcast, but what makes us go, actually, if they break this promise, it's a no deal. But if we end up accepting that, then it's okay. Like, it's almost like, well, the thing is, we can set certain boundaries and promises in certain ways, but we can easily break them. And again, it comes back to that, what's it attached to? If there's no value to it, if there's no attachment to it, if there's no significance, maybe it's even tempering onto self-worth, which actually goes on to dwelling on mistakes, right? So for me, if we talk about the next sign of self-sabotage is dwelling on mistakes. I know I did this a lot.
Oh, for sure.
Because it's almost we are catastrophizing the event, because realistically we're going to see it from our own point of view, right? And our interpretation of another's perspective is vastly different, negative, or even exaggerated in our head. I mean, I know I did this a lot while I was coaching, especially in the early days of S&C coaching. I would look back and think everything I did was negative or poor. Like, I probably classed it as reflection, but it probably was like, why on earth did I do that? Like, why did I put that in there? And then in terms of like, I'm dissecting each and every part of it on what I could have done better, but it probably took me the longest route to try and get to the solution. Where you're like, what mistake would you have learned? And rather than going direct, I'm like, wow, that was shit, and that was poor, and that wasn't so good. And like, I'm dwelling on all of these things, and I'm kind of like, I'm wringing the cloth as dry as it can be with all of the mistakes I made. And then all of a sudden I'm like, yeah, could have done that differently. But it's almost like we're so busy in our own heads. I'm like, for me, this came so easily, like thinking, overthinking, overanalyzing on past events and circumstances. So it's almost like I think, if I'm honest, I'm going to be vulnerable. It's probably that self-worth. It's that lack of self-worth as a coach at that time, because obviously I was new, and that lack of self-worth, which made me dwell on those mistakes a lot more.
Yeah, yeah. But you grew up in a very encouraging environment. You were encouraged to educate yourself and you were praised a lot, would you say? So where did that lack of self-worth come from? Is that you were hard on yourself, or there was high expectations that you were constantly trying to, or constantly reaching, but anything below that?
I don't think we were praised as much. Like, I don't think that really happens in family. Like, in terms of, I don't know, like in terms of having a healthy relationship with your parents and your siblings, it has to come from what are my parents' expectations of me and what are my expectations that I want to give of my parents, right? So there is going to be some sort of push and pull, like, you know, for Indian kids especially, they might want to take, back in the day, it might be, right, a lawyer or a doctor or an accountant, like a solid foundation with your career, something that's stable, that's setting you up for success, right?
Yeah.
With me, I wasn't a part of that trend, and I didn't want to go in those professions. So it wasn't a case of being praised to go through education and coaching the way I did. It was a case of I was able to find what I enjoy. I was able to pursue my passion, which I know for a lot of families, it's not exclusive to Indians, but there's a lot of families who have that expectation on their children. You know, like I graduated from this university. I expect you to graduate from this university too, right? I've got this business. I expect you to follow through and take over the business. And so having that massive burden or expectation on you from family, that's going to cause some sort of, you know, putting that expectation of what you should be on a pedestal. So when we then don't maintain that expectation, or we're not solid on that pedestal, we start to dwell on the mistakes, because as I said earlier, we're catastrophizing not only what we have done wrong, but what we expect others would think of us.
Okay.
Dwelling on those mistakes.
Yeah. So what do you think a mistake is? Is it like, when you say a mistake, is it a life-changing thing that you're dwelling on?
I think I went a little bit too deep into this. It could literally
I'm just wondering, because it could be just a lot of little mistakes.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. And we should like send them off with the wind.
Exactly. I think so. For me, I gave the example of coaching. Like, that would be one event, right? It would be one coaching session. And then it went on to mistakes that, I don't know, people have taken a different trajectory for careers, or dwelling on mistakes like in past relationships. Like, whatever you class as a mistake or a failure, like in terms of, we are self-sabotaging ourselves because we keep dredging it up. Maybe it's a case that we haven't fully learned that lesson. We haven't fully understood what it was trying to teach us, or we have understood it, but we're not willing to let it go.
Or you're putting too much emphasis on a little thing. So if you reframe it, and I was trying to think of another way of reframing the word mistake, but I sort of came up with experience. So you're not making mistakes, you're gaining experience.
I love that.
So you put a positive spin on it, right? And then even if you do dwell on it, you are dwelling on experience.
I love that. And the thing is, where did it come from that we are reprimanded for mistakes or failures or whatever it is? And now we've got to the stage of, yes, we can be vulnerable. Yes, we can showcase our feelings and our emotions. And I know there's still we're still behind in society as a collective and in certain cultures, and how to be vulnerable and be open and admit our failures or mistakes. I think that you make a really, really good point, because actually, are they a mistake? Is anything a mistake if we've learned from it? Isn't life about learning?
Yeah. Oh, I believe so. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like every day is an opportunity to learn, and an opportunity to make mistakes, and an opportunity that if you make a mistake that hurts someone, to make up or own up to that. So,
but the thing is, what I was going to actually take on the dwelling on mistakes, we can literally take it in all these different directions, can't we? But for dwelling on mistakes, doesn't that then, or not able to learn the lessons or overcome those lessons, doesn't that mean that we are then less likely to take that risk, to take that opportunity because of the past mistakes or failures that we may have made?
so we're not likely to, okay, sorry, I lost.
So we're not likely to take that risk because of past failures or mistakes. So we're not likely to
go down that,
yeah,
do the same thing again, or
because that's self-sabotage,
again.
isn't it? Self-sabotaging yourself by saying, I'm not going to go present because you know what? I fudged it up last time and it was catastrophic in my head. Right?
Done so it's just then. Yes, and I think that also ties in with not wanting to be visible, or taking yourself away from being visible.
Yeah.
Because this, working with the Paralympic team has made me really aware of this. So some of them are really open to being photographed and being the face of this and that, and others are like, I just want to be in the background. I don't want people to see me with my amputated limbs. I don't want people to see me. I don't want to be the face of, I don't know what I look like, I can't see. I don't want to be the face. So, that can stop you succeeding. That can stop them winning gold medals, because if they do win gold medals, they don't want to be on the podium,
Yeah.
So you can be really, really good at what you do and then self-sabotage in the race because you don't want to be visible at the end of it. And that applies to all of us in our own little Olympic race, right? So if you are doing a fabulous job getting more noted and known and visible, do you pull back sometimes? Do some people? Do you self-sabotage in a way that stops for you? I do.
I remember just only a couple of years ago that somebody asked me to do an interview and I flat out said no. Or even to be like a little, what do they call it? Just like little excerpt in a little social media, like reel or whatever it would have been at that time. And I'm like, no, I don't want to be that. I was under the impression that coaches are background staff, like we are in the background, we are in the shadows, and I took that almost to heart. So I'm like, no, I'm not there. And that obviously stemmed from the lack of self-worth and self-confidence back then. I'm in a totally different place now, but back then I never would have done a podcast with you, Cal. Never. I never would have done YouTube videos. Like, no way would I have seen myself on camera, because it's just like that just wasn't who I was, and like wasn't part of my category. Like, and that would be dwelling on mistakes. That would be self-sabotage myself, because I don't see myself on that I would make a mistake. And that's actually catastrophizing not the past but the future.
Yes.
And I used to do this a lot, like dwelling on the past, but also making a scenario up thinking it would go to pot, right? And so for me, I was reading it's a Dale Carnegie book, How to Make Friends and Influence People, I think.
Yeah.
And there's another one he did. There's another one he did about being and happiness, on like how to I can't remember the name of it. I just remember that name, but there's another book that he did, which I followed religiously. It's like How to Stop Worrying or something like that, because I was like, I need to stop worrying. This is like almost over 10 years ago. I was like, I need to read this book, and I read it religiously. And within one of his chapters, he actually said, make a habit to inflate that scenario, make it the worst possible scenario you could ever possibly take it to. So I was like, okay, well, this is interesting. And then what you're doing is you're working backwards. So that if that's the worst case scenario, accept it. Right, okay, am I going to die from this? Probably not. Would I probably maybe fall off stage and like hit my face and go to A&E? Potentially. You know, would people laugh at me? Would I stumble over my words? So all of these worst case scenarios into presenting, for example, accept them. Right, just literally acknowledge them and then work backwards, right? And you know what I'm like, Cal, like preparation
queen of the world.
So for me, it's like, well, how much can I prepare? And then the rest is, well, whatever it will be according to circumstances. You can't control scenarios. So it's almost like making peace of the potential that could go wrong, or even in taking a positive spin that you did on mistakes and making them lessons. Why wouldn't you envision the best scenario? Like, I've gone on stage, I've given this stellar presentation, I've got people to laugh, people took like points that they can take at home with them. I've had, you know, and just make that scenario in a positive spin. And whether it happens that way, great. And if it doesn't, well, that's okay too. But you're almost inflating that self-confidence to go onto the stage and stepping into your best self.
I have heard that kind of working through a fear like that before, but I can't remember where, and I definitely didn't use it. But anyway, that book, I looked it up, How to Stop Worrying and Start Living.
That's the book. I loved that book. Loved it.
Okay. Yeah.
And that was one of the things I took from it.
Yeah. Okay. I was listening to a podcast the other day, and one of the experts on the podcast was telling or said that was the most influential book that he'd ever read. And he was a billionaire, or was he an FBI guy? Oh, I like the FBI podcast as well. But anyway, it might have been the FBI guy actually, because he was saying that he had to work in Russia as a Russian spy. And this was the book that helped him win friends and influence people, I guess. He said, so he didn't follow it to the letter, but he utilized it in his own life and his own circumstances. And he found it was great. So, all right, I should read it.
Well, there's that, yeah. And then the How to Stop Worrying. I think that was the biggest thing for me, because, well, we've got a history of depression in our family. And so, and I obviously experienced anxiety and depression going through my life. So in terms of that lack of confidence, that lack of self-worth, that ruminating over past events was quite regular for me. And it was changing those habits. Like, what can I do to change those habits? What can I do to change my mindset? And gosh, it's taken a few years, hasn't it?
And it has, because I think you've really taken a very deep dive into it, Tuls. You haven't glossed over it at all. And it has been life-changing for you, hasn't it?
Oh,
yeah, you haven't mucked around with it. So yes, it's taken a few years, but I mean, not that many years.
Well, I think it was almost like near breakdown in 2018 to now, which is
waited right till you're at the
it's about 3 years. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah.
So it's taken me 3 years to learn how to not do what I've done for like 34 odd years.
That's okay, because some people never learn. So
exactly. Well, actually, on that last point, that this next one, obviously, to tie up this episode before we go into more self-sabotage signs, this one I definitely resonated with, struggling to set boundaries. And like I said, I think I'm resonating with all of them at some point, but struggling to set boundaries, like I went on to trusty Google, as I said earlier. Harley Therapy defined struggling to set boundaries is you secretly feel that others don't show you respect. If you don't set boundaries, people won't know how to act around you, and you will be left feeling disrespected. So the other side of this coin is that without your own boundaries, you're less likely to recognize those of others, and then might unwillingly be disrespectful to them. I really liked that.
That's a really simple way of saying a very complex thing. And I like it too. Because I've read lots of different versions of that, but that one is easy to understand and makes perfect sense.
Yeah. So we are afraid of not being respected, but we're not setting boundaries to show what our respect is.
Yeah.
And then without setting those boundaries, either we are being disrespected or we're easily disrespecting others because we don't know their boundaries.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. Yeah. This is a cultural thing as well. Have you worked with a few different cultures at work?
No, but I think you're going to give us a good example, so I'm going to let you.
Oh, no. Well, yes and no. I mean, okay, I'm Australian, and the Australians will have a real casual, gosh, mates with everyone, right? So there's a real casual racism. People are quite offended by it at times because there is, but to an Australian, and we're learning slowly, but we're learning that if we went to the States and spoke the way we would normally, or in the past, have spoken about friends even, it would not be tolerated, or it would be considered very racist, or we would be profiling, which I'd never heard of that word until fairly recently, like in the last few years, profiling, racial profiling. But yeah, Australians are really casually racist, I'm told. And I believe it. I think we are, some of the things we say, but we don't mean to say it in it's a real affectionate way. If you, and you know how Australians speak to each other, it's like, it's nasty. Like if, friends call each other dreadful names.
Yeah, but I think that happens in friends groups too. Like I know for boys especially, they'll ridicule each other.
Yes,
like,
yeah.
To the point of, if you did that to me or another girl, like I would cry.
I was gonna say they'd be
I wouldn't. I'd probably punch them and just be like,
oh, I know at the time.
What other things could I say back to retaliate? But apparently that's affectionate, right? And so guys just have this, different guy groups will have different ways of communicating with each other. So maybe it's coming back to that level of honesty right from the beginning, that they're actually openly ridiculing each other to their face. Whereas I know certain girl groups, and I'm talking about like 15 years, 20 years ago, could happen now. But in terms of bitching about each other, about another girl within their group. So with guys, I know this from experience with my guy friends, is they'll just openly ridicule each other. And yeah, it could hurt some of their members of their group, but they're like, well, everything's laid out on the table right now. Like, we'll tell you how it is. We'll tell you you're dressing like an idiot, or you're acting like an idiot, or you are an idiot. Whatever those things are, they will be called out on it, right? Whereas girls will less likely do that. I don't know why, but then they'll talk about it to their other girlfriends. So that's gossip then, isn't it? So it's almost like guys are bringing it to the table, openly sharing, leaving it there.
Yeah.
Maybe not all. I've heard some guys have this like mother gossip group. But it's like, then if we take on the flip side of girl groups, like why do we want to, or why do some bitch about other women? To make themselves feel good? Or I don't know, one girl will leave and then somebody will automatically instigate something. And I think it whittles down to that self-worth.
Yeah, I think a lot of the time it does. So you're elevating yourself by putting someone else down. So you're not actually growing in respect, but you're elevating pushing someone else down to bring yourself up. Does that make sense? You're both at this level and you're not actually going up, you're just pushing this person down.
Well, aren't you harming your own self-respect, not only to yourself, but then to others? Because they're like, well, I'm not going to say anything because I know she bitches about this.
Yeah, not trustworthy.
Why would you be honest in that group of people, collective?
Yeah, I wouldn't. Yeah, exactly. Absolutely, exactly. I wouldn't. Yeah, and you would. Well, you'd lack self-worth as well, because you would expect that someone is saying something about you as well. And so even if they are not, the suspicion is there, right? And suspicion would eat away at you. I think enough that your self-worth would be whittled down.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And this is the thing, like, even though we say that some guys will ridicule each other, it doesn't. I know a friend who then said, I want the guys to stop making fun of me because I feel really shit about it now. And I was like, yes, but you need to say that. Like, your self-respect drives on your honesty of setting that boundary to say, I'm unwilling to accept this behavior. That is a boundary. Yes, and that's voicing. And the thing is, if you're lacking self-worth and you're feeling degraded, disrespected, and your self-worth is just hit rock bottom, where are you going to find that confidence to actually say what your value and worth and your boundaries?
Confidence. Yeah, right? You wouldn't have confidence. It would be bravado. Yeah.
Or somebody else does it for you. Like, I know. So we'll take a family scenario as this example of, we were all making fun of my one cousin, and it's just easy to make fun of. And then all of a sudden, my other cousin, is the sister of my cousin, was like, stop picking on him, like, stop, enough now. And she was really like hell-bent on just standing up for him, but also she was uncomfortable with it. But we were just having a playful dig, but then she took it to another level. And this is where you have to have those lines. Like, it can't be blurry. So for some people, they think I'm just playing. Like you said, Australians think of their way of communicating and verbalizing these things aren't offensive, but in another culture they are. And it's almost like, say, going back to that, your friends group doesn't think of it as offensive, but another group of people will.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, I'm sure it happens in a lot of places in a lot of different ways, and it's, well, you've even experienced in your own family, and you were part of the ribbing, you know. And what about the person who you were ribbing? Were they okay with it? Were they laughing along, or were they?
I think we were all collectively doing it, so it was almost like we were all picking on this individual, which probably wasn't great for the individual. But like, he gets it a lot. He gets it a lot in most groups, and he's not always the center of ribbing. There's other people too. It's almost like, oh, I don't want to describe it this way, but I feel like it's the weaker of the pack. You just end up ribbing a person, which is not very nice. But I understand from my other cousin's perspective when she stood up to him. And I was like, well, yeah, actually, let's make better conversation. Why? Yes, I get we're playing, and I get we're just ribbing each other, but actually, maybe we are denting his confidence at some point. So we should pick another topic.
Was it unusual behavior for her to stand up for anyone?
I think it was unusual for her, just the amount of ribbing we do to him. And this is what me and my brother were talking about. Like, in our friend circle, like, that's normal. It's completely normal. But in this scenario, it wasn't, which meant she needed to stand up and speak up. And so it was funny because, again, it's knowing your environment and knowing the people within it. But because he hasn't said, stop, I'm like, oh, we're not listening. I don't know what it is. And again, it's almost like, let's take this into I don't want to say a lighter scenario, but in terms of, I know I struggle to set boundaries, or I used to, and I'm learning how to more and more. But in terms of, why do women especially struggle to set boundaries?
We
And
struggle
how
to
do
say
we
no.
honor our own commitments and spending time on the commitments, like with our own self-worth, our own self-care, that
Yeah.
serve us the most? Because those are boundaries too, right? Self-care, self-worth, going back to those values. How do we set those
And I
boundaries?
think so much of it comes back to knowing those values, because if you don't know your values but you try to set boundaries, you're either taking someone else's opinion and therefore someone else's boundary on as yours, or you really just have no idea where to start. But if you know your values are, I'm loyal to Tuls, but someone speaks poorly about you, or no, this stops here. So I know that's my value, so I know my boundary is around that. But if I didn't have kindness as a value, then I wouldn't know that I only wanted to be around people that spread kindness and are kind and do have kind hearts and do things out of kindness,
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. So I do think knowing those 4 points, or however many you want, but 4 is a good number to be able to keep going and think of. I think
from our last episode, I think I rewrote some of my values and I came up with 6, and I was like, oh, I didn't say these other ones. we can have unlimited ones, right? It's just voicing those values. It's all well and good to have that. It's all well and good to say, I know my worth, but actually if they are contradictory to how you act or how others treat you, well, then that's not you setting those boundaries.
That's right. Yeah, you're not congruent to them. And when your actions are not congruent to your values, I think that's when you start to feel unwell and sick. I think you do get sick, and that tiredness does creep in, because it's a stress makes you tired, and you're just adding another layer of stress on top of everything else you do. So yeah, having your actions congruent to your values takes a layer of stress. It's a layer of sinking off, and like you say, you're not disrespecting other people intentionally or unintentionally, mostly unintentionally, right? And you're not disrespecting yourself, or self-sabotaging yourself, or breaking promises to yourself and others, because you're working within your boundaries, which are congruent to values.
Exactly. And so the thing is, if you're not congruent to your values and what you are practicing and actioning, there's that internal struggle, and that internal struggle ends up with the anxiety, with the stress. It then piles on top of other responsibilities that you've got in life, and then you've got the water just overflowing in your glass now. Like, you can't possibly have more energy for yourself, and that's where you're just doing step by step, and you can't literally think of the bigger picture. I think that that definitely is, it has to stem from something. It has to stem from that self-worth, in terms of, it has to stem from some sort of trauma, right? Like, I know my trauma and the various aspects of it led me to this point, but it can be unconscious. It can be that negative self-limiting belief. It can be from our genetics, as I said earlier. Depression and certain diseases can actually infiltrate into your experience as a human in this lifetime. It's the relationships you have, it's your environment. But if those are unresolved, that internalizes, and then that shapes the self-worth that we have, or lack thereof.
Oh, it's just one big catch-22.
Yeah. So say, for example, if somebody is experiencing low self-worth, we collectively know, right? Align with your values, figure out what your values are, and then that is your core principles, that's your core belief system that you are not willing to renegotiate on, right? So if somebody is struggling to set boundaries with, say, a work colleague, something that they keep taking advantage of. You go into meetings, you always end up with the one with more responsibility or doing more of the work in preparation for this deadline, project, next meeting, whatever it is. How do you set those boundaries with that person who you feel is taking advantage of you?
Are you asking me the answer?
Yeah, like isn't it about having that difficult conversation? So rather than self-sabotaging ourselves by remaining small, being assertive and actually being able to go, I'm going to have this difficult conversation. I'm not going to shy away from it. And I'm going to talk about how I feel.
Yeah, wow, Tuls. I am not an assertive person, especially to someone who, I mean, that sounds like a kind of a very, someone acting very bullish, not necessarily bullying, but acting bullish, which means like a bull at a gate, you know, it's their way or the highway. This is the way we do it. And Tuls or Kelly is the dumping ground for everything I don't want to do. And that doesn't sit well with me. Okay, let me think. I guess there does need to be a conversation, but I think I would go about it. I would make friends with that person. I would want to know why are they acting like that rather
what
than
if they're not interested? What if they're like, no, you do that, I'm doing my own thing, and they're in this peacock scenarios, like character, and they know everything, they've got the experience, and you know nothing scenario.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so the answer to that is they don't know everything, and there's always going to be a bit of a chink in the armor, isn't there? And I think those kind of people actually lack self-worth anyway, or self-esteem. Definitely. And so it's bravado a lot of the time. So, you know, there's little ways that you can just let them know that you know, I guess. And I think that's possibly what I've done previously, is just let them know you know. And I guess if you want to align it to your values and then have that conversation. Did you say at some point that you don't necessarily know your values, or you don't know your boundaries? Or you haven't?
I think that if people don't know it, that's the first place to start. But that's
people don't know it. Yeah. Okay. I think people don't know it because you don't know it. And if you know it, then you act accordingly to that.
Yeah.
And your actions, you don't even have to verbalize it. If you acted, you act within that, you know, your own boundaries and the way you treat others within your boundaries. Now, I think we spoke last week as well, is that your boundaries or your values might not align with my boundaries. And so something that I consider really important is like, you could not care less.
Yeah.
Okay. And I'm not speaking about you. I'm speaking about this horrible person at the meeting. This horrible person at the meeting doesn't care about that value. It's not one of theirs. So one of theirs would be, I am successful, and yours is, I am kind. They don't really align. So they're going to act like a successful person, and you're going to act like a kind person. But I think if you do know your boundaries and you continually act kind, but as well as your other 3 or your other 5, if you're Tuls, values, then your boundaries are going to show up at some stage. And if you are being treated poorly, then maybe you need to add another boundary, another value in that says, I am deserving, and then you act deserving. Or another word, that's just one that came to mind.
Yeah, I do agree with you, because actually now you're looking at the whole pathway, just to say it could start with something as, I don't want to say small, but it could start with a scenario where you just feel disrespected, degraded, a lot of responsibility, and you're taking that because of your kindness, because of your loyalty, because of your work ethic, and that's fine. But it doesn't align with this individual's, they put finances, success, accolade, reward as their values, and that's fine for them, but it's a major clash between the both of you. But the thing is, if then you're not acting on your boundaries, or you're not verbalizing them, and they're continually acting on their values, it could come to that clash where you just end up leaving because you're so unhappy with the relationships and the lack of boundaries in this work environment. And then it ends up with like toxic relationships, or, you know, disruptive relationships at work. But for people who have that lack of self-worth, they internalize it. And they think, well, there's something wrong with me, or I've done something wrong, because they haven't been able to verbalize it or confront this person.
Yeah.
And that is a self-sabotage. It's like saying, oh, well, I had to leave. This is probably, you know, this, I hope this doesn't like trigger anybody, but maybe it's a case of, I had to leave this position because this person was awful. Well, yeah, that's self-sabotage, because you weren't able to set your boundaries. You weren't able to stick up for yourself. You weren't able to bring up your self-worth.
Yeah.
Or maybe you did and it failed, and then you had to leave. Like, we don't know the situation, but it's just like everybody's going to have the particular scenario, right?
Absolutely. And I know I've had roles and positions, or a role and a position that didn't suit me, and so I did leave. And there were situations when I didn't speak up, and maybe because I wasn't acting congruent to my values, and didn't set boundaries. But I left, and I just look back and I go, it just wasn't, the people surrounding me were not my people. I was just one like little person in amongst everyone who was very, you know, so arrogance is given a very poor rap as a value. But, you know, some people actually want to be seen that way, you know, and so they act that way. And so I was surrounded by people who, you know, were arrogant and bullish, and none of it was similar to my values. There was no common ground in conversation or action. And so I left, and it was the best thing I did. So I don't know that if it doesn't work out, if you try and it doesn't work out, I don't think leaving's a bad idea.
No,
I don't think.
And this is why I wanted those two scenarios. And you make a really good point on that collective didn't align with your values. And I think that is so important. And it just goes back to that. Self-sabotage has to merge. It has to have the relationship with values. Because if you don't have that, well, then it's going to seep into every aspect of life and every relationship, every scenario, right?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, in your relationships with anyone, with friends, and, you know, your partner and your parents, and, you know, and then you can actually end up with the, you know, fake it till you make it bravado. If that's not the true you, then you're not doing yourself any favors, really, because you're faking it, you know. But I don't know. I do know lots of people who sort of say now that they've faked it till they make it, but, you know, along the way, I don't know that they were truly faking it. They were doing a great job, and learning and getting experience. So I think when you say you fake it till you make it, you can possibly fake. You can't fake knowing stuff. You can't fake. There are a lot of things you can't fake, and there are only a few things that you can probably tell yourself or act. Yeah.
And that, you make a really good point, actually, because our next episode will talk about more of the self-sabotage, but really it's that self-critical voice. It's not only self-critical voice, but procrastination. It's imposter syndrome. So you know, a few things to think about. Are we supposed to act like we have it, or we're successful, and fake it till we make it? And meanwhile, we've got this imposter syndrome this whole time. So I think that's going to be an interesting conversation, Cal.
Will be. And I think we could talk to a lot of people that we know who would say that imposter syndrome is alive and well inside them.
Yeah, that's going to be a really good episode. So, oh my goodness, we can literally just talk for ages. I think we've definitely delved into so much today. And just to recap, we were talking about breaking promises to ourselves, dwelling on mistakes, and struggling to set boundaries in every facet of life, not just in work, but also in our relationships and family too. So, if you did resonate with us, please hit the subscribe button if you're not already subscribed on YouTube, and pass on this podcast to your family and friends. And we value you and support your listening. So thank you so much for being a part of us today.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And thanks,
Cal. Thank you, Cal.